I'm Graham Mercer, 36, and this summer my mom sent the same text she sent for the last 3 years. No space for you at the retreat this year, honey. They'd rented extra villas for 118 people. Family, friends, even the guy who used to mow our lawn. I wasn't on the list, not even as a footnote. So I signed a purchase agreement the next morning, sunlight hitting the pen, the keys still warm from the realtor's hand. If you've ever been left out of something you helped build, tell me where you're listening from. The message came just after lunch, tucked between a Target promo and an automated notice from my bank. It buzzed on my phone with that soft vibration I'd grown to dread around this time every year. I didn't even need to read it. I already knew the shape of the words, the pacing, the false warmth folded into them like stale sugar packets. No space for you at the retreat this summer, honey. Hope you're well. I stared at the screen. Same wording as last year. And the year before that. 3 summers in a row now. I didn't respond. I just set the phone down next to my coffee cup and leaned back in my chair. The apartment was quiet. Quiet in that old house kind of way, where you can hear the AC hum through the vents and the faint shifting of wood in the walls. Sunlight slanted across the floor through the blinds, catching on the edge of the old photo frame that sat on my bookshelf. It was a black and white picture of Grandpa Robert standing by the dock, grinning in that half-squint way he had. I'd taken the photo myself with a disposable camera. Must have been 12. He had one hand on the railing and the other holding a fishing pole he never really used. We mostly talked on those trips. Or walked. The retreat used to be ours. I opened my laptop, more out of habit than intention, and tried to focus on the client project I'd been chipping away at all week. A logo package for a local coffee roaster, trying to look more authentic. I clicked through my design drafts, but my hands hovered over the keyboard like they didn't belong to me. The designs looked flat. The colors clashed. Everything felt off. I shut the laptop with a soft thump. There was a knock at the door. I didn't get up. I already knew who it was. "Open up, Mercer," came Lena's voice through the door, light and teasing. I brought carbs and questionable moral support. I let her in. She breezed into the apartment like she lived there, tossing her bag on the couch and pulling out a brown paper bag that smelled like sourdough and rosemary. "I also brought fancy butter," she said, wiggling her eyebrows, "because you, my friend, look like someone who just got emotionally gut-punched by his own family." "Got the text," I said flatly, heading into the kitchen to grab plates. "Same as always?" "Word for word." She sat at the counter, tore into the loaf like it had personally offended her, and passed me a slice. I didn't eat right away. I just stood there, staring at the butter melting in the middle. "You gonna go this year anyway?" she asked. "Crash the party, kick down the door, make a dramatic toast?" I gave her a look. Too soon? I exhaled through my nose, part laugh, part exhaustion. It's not even that they don't invite me. It's how efficient they are at not inviting me. No space, huh? Exactly. Every year. As if they couldn't squeeze in one more chair, one more bed, like it's a fire code violation. Lena reached over and squeezed my hand. "Have you ever asked them why?" she said quietly. I shook my head. "And you won't." "No," I said, "because I already know the answer. I just never hear it out loud." I left the bread half-eaten and walked back to the living room, sinking into the couch. I pulled my phone out again and, against my better judgment, opened Instagram. I hadn't scrolled through my family's profiles in months, but something in me wanted proof. Confirmation. It didn't take long. Blake had posted a throwback reel from last year's retreat. Everyone in matching t-shirts, arms around each other, kids splashing in the lake, my dad giving some kind of toast at sunset. There were faces I hadn't seen in years, cousins, old family friends. Someone I think used to mow their lawn. Not me. I kept scrolling. A group shot. 60? Maybe more. Another post from Amanda with a caption that read, "Family is everything." I felt something crack, not loudly, but like a window seal giving under pressure. "I've been replaced," I said, mostly to myself. "No," Lena said, sitting beside me now. "You've been ignored. That's different. Replacement implies someone tried to fill the gap you left. They just pretended there wasn't a gap." She was right, and that somehow made it worse. I looked down at my hands. They were steady, but my chest wasn't. There was a tightness behind my ribs, like the beginning of a panic attack, only quieter. Quieter and colder. "This year," I said, "I'm not just going to take it. I'm not going to vanish quietly again." Lena looked at me for a long second. "Good," she said. "Let's make some noise then." There's something about cold light that makes the truth harder to ignore. I sat at my desk that night, long after Lena had gone home and the sourdough had hardened on the counter. The lamp cast a warm cone across my keyboard, but the rest of the apartment was dark. I didn't need much light to do what I was doing. I was hunting shadows. Instagram had never been my favorite thing, but I knew it well enough to navigate the family minefield. I searched Blake's profile, not because I thought he'd be subtle, but because he never had been. Blake was the kind of person who thought privacy was for people who had something to hide. He believed his life was meant to be performed. And there it was. A post from 2 days ago, geotagged at Lake Arrowhead, same place as every year. A photo of a printed itinerary tacked to the wall of the main cabin. Caption: "Biggest retreat yet. Let's go." The picture was blurry, bad lighting, glare in the top right corner. But I knew that wall. I'd seen it hundreds of times growing up, where Grandpa used to pin fishing maps, weather reports, goofy cartoons clipped from newspapers. Now it held a spreadsheet. I pinched and zoomed. The list was long. Each line had a name, cabin assignment, meal plan notes. There were notes like vegetarian and sleeps light and brings their own wine. I counted. There were 118 lines. 118. I read slowly, row by row. Jack, Amanda, the twins, Sarah, their spouses, kids, a few cousins I hadn't heard from since high school, a family friend who once babysat us, a colleague of my dad's from the bank, even Blake's college roommate, who used to call me Grammar instead of Graham, but not me. I leaned back in the chair. The vinyl creaked. My mouth was dry. It wasn't about space. It had never been about space. I pulled up Jack's number and typed a message. "Me. Big group this year, huh?" I stared at it. Deleted the "huh." Added it back. Finally hit send. The reply came a minute later. "Jack. Yeah, kinda got big. Mom went all out. That was it. No, you should come. No, wish you were here. Not even a fake excuse. Me. Cool. Must be a lot of work organizing it all." Another pause. Jack. "Yeah. They actually rented 2 other places nearby for overflow." I put the phone down. That was the moment. Right there. Not the blurry list. Not the Instagram caption. That second message. They had rented extra property, extra rooms, extra beds. And still, I wasn't included. I remembered that Christmas 5 years ago. We'd done Secret Santa, and everyone got gifts that meant something. A signed cookbook for Amanda, a Bluetooth speaker for Jack, matching scarves for the twins. I got a Visa gift card, no name on the envelope, no note, just $50 and a weak smile from Mom. We didn't know what you needed. They hadn't known because they hadn't asked. I picked up the phone again, thought about texting Lena, then thought better of it. She'd seen this play out too many times. Instead, I opened a blank note on my phone and typed, 118 people. And not me. I didn't hit save. I just stared at the words for a while, letting them echo in that private chamber where disappointment goes after it's grown too familiar. Then I stood. I walked to the window. The street outside was quiet, a soft glow from the distant freeway throwing a haze into the sky. Across the alley, the neighbor's TV flickered blue and white through half-closed blinds. Somewhere in the building, someone was doing laundry, metal clanking in an old machine. I pressed my forehead to the glass. I wasn't sad, not exactly. Not in the way people usually describe it. This wasn't the sharp sadness that comes from being betrayed. It was duller, older, like finding a shirt in the back of your closet that no longer fits, but remembering how much you used to love it. I wasn't just excluded, I was erased. And that felt intentional. I whispered it out loud, just to hear how it sounded. They didn't forget me, they just didn't include me. It didn't sting less. But at least now, I wasn't making excuses for them. Maybe it was time I stopped asking for space at their table. Maybe it was time I built my own. If they weren't going to make room for me, maybe it was time I stopped waiting for the invitation. The coffee on my desk had gone cold hours ago. I kept reheating it, letting it sit, then forgetting it again. The mug left 3 identical rings on the edge of the coaster, like some passive protest against productivity. It was late, well past midnight, but sleep hadn't even flirted with me. I sat hunched in front of my laptop, cycling through tabs I didn't remember opening. Graphic files, email drafts, half-read articles on resilience in adulthood. Then somehow, I ended up on a real estate site. Not because I was planning anything, not consciously. At first, I was just looking. Lake homes, cabins for rent, the kind of places people imagined for escape. I scrolled aimlessly, filtering by price, then by location. Lake Arrowhead, of course. I didn't expect to find anything meaningful, just background noise for the ache I couldn't name yet. Then Ruth called. The screen lit up with her name, and I answered on instinct. She never called late unless it mattered. "Graham," she said, her voice crisp and crackly through the video. "You look like someone who just swallowed a lemon and didn't find the punchline." I exhaled. Family stuff. I assumed. You always get that saggy look around this time of year. She paused, then leaned closer to the screen. "Tell me." I didn't dramatize it. I told her about the text, the list, the second property they'd rented without thinking to include me. The same line. No space. I kept it short, but she got it. When I finished, she didn't blink. "You gonna react?" she asked. "What do you mean?" "You've got 2 choices, Graham. React or build." I blinked at her. Reacting is what they expect. A guilt trip email. Some social media post full of pain and passive anger. But building? That's different. She leaned back and tilted her head. Some people spend their whole lives waiting for a seat at someone else's table. But people like you build the damn table. The call ended a few minutes later, but her voice stuck with me. I clicked back to the real estate site. The listing hadn't refreshed. Still there, still staring at me. A 3-story Lakeview property 15 minutes from town. White exterior with wood-trimmed windows, a massive deck, vaulted ceilings. 6 bedrooms, direct access to the dock, and this is what made me sit up straight, right next to my parents' retreat property. I recognized the tree line, the fence, the curve of the lake shore. It was bold, it was ridiculous, it was expensive, it was perfect. I clicked through the gallery, open concept kitchen, stone fireplace, a wraparound porch that could hold 20 people easy, a space for conversation, for quiet, for all the things their retreat had forgotten. I stopped at the last photo, a view from the upstairs loft, overlooking the lake through floor-to-ceiling windows. The sun was low in the sky, the water coppery and still. I felt something shift. It wasn't rage, it wasn't grief, it was possibility. I stared at the contact number for the listing agent. My hand hovered over the phone for a full 30 seconds before I dialed. A sleepy voice answered. "This is Donna." "Hi. Sorry for the late call. I'm interested in scheduling a viewing." There was a pause, then a polite pivot. "Tomorrow works." "Tomorrow's perfect." After I hung up, I sat in silence, letting the hum of my own decision settle into the room. I'd never done something like this, not impulsively. Every move I'd made in my life had been calculated, cautious, but this felt different. Not rash, just overdue. My laptop pinged softly. I looked back at the listing page, now refreshed. A note had been added below the pricing. "Available the exact week of your stay." I didn't smile. Not exactly. But I let myself lean back in the chair and whisper one word into the still air. Mine. Maybe this was what building looked like. Not revenge, not spite, just space. Space that belonged to me. I didn't flinch when I signed the papers. There was no dramatic pause, no last-minute doubt. Just the scratch of pen against paper, the scent of fresh ink mixing with pine outside the open window. And in that silence, more than in any "I'm proud of you" I'd never heard, I felt something settle, something final. The realtor, a woman named Donna, not my mother's Donna, thank God, was warm but businesslike. She'd met me in front of the property just past 9 that morning. Sunlight filtered through the tall pines, scattering across the gravel driveway. Her heels crunched softly as we walked. "You're lucky," she said, as she unlocked the front door. "This one was about to come off the market. The seller nearly pulled it yesterday." I didn't respond. Lucky wasn't how I'd describe it. Inside, the air was still. Not stale, just untouched. It smelled like wood and dust, and the faint linger of whatever linen spray the staging crew had used. Probably something called cedar morning, or cabin mist. I followed her through the house. Everything looked exactly as it had online. Open layout, warm tones, big windows that made the lake feel like it was part of the living room. The hardwood floors creaked in the right places. The fireplace had a storybook look to it. There was a breakfast nook that practically begged for coffee mugs and quiet conversations. But it wasn't until I stepped out onto the deck that it hit me. There it was. The fence line. Weathered cedar slats running along the back of the property. Beyond it, maybe 30 yards away, stood the house I'd grown up visiting every summer. My parents' retreat home. The one I hadn't been invited to in 3 years. I could make out the curve of their dock, the green Adirondack chairs, the old canoe propped against the shed. I could almost hear my grandfather's voice echoing from memory. "This lake keeps secrets, Graham. That's why it listens so well." Donna said something behind me, but I didn't catch it. I stood there for a minute, maybe 2, letting the weight of the moment wash over me. This wasn't a rental. This wasn't a hypothetical. This was mine. When we went back inside, she handed me the paperwork. I signed every line without hesitating. "Would you like a moment alone before I leave?" she asked, sliding the keys across the counter. "I would," I said. She nodded and slipped out the door. The house sighed when she left. That's the only way I can describe it. The kind of quiet that expands once no one's watching. I walked through each room again, slower this time. No staging, no lens, just me in real light. In the upstairs bedroom, what would become the main guest suite, I found the perfect view. A wide picture window, perfectly framing the lake and part of the shared property line. The irony wasn't lost on me. I took a photo with my phone, sent it to Lena with a one-line message. "It's done." My phone vibrated a minute later with her voice message. "Holy sh... You really did it. Graham, you bought the house. You bought it. There was a pause, then softer. I hope it feels good. I hope it feels like yours. It did. Not because of the view, or the fireplace, or even the symbolic location. Because I chose it. Because it wasn't handed to me out of obligation, or ceremony, or appearance. Because it wasn't a token seat at someone else's table. It was a table I could build. I wandered back downstairs and stood in the center of the living room. The late morning sun had moved, casting long shadows across the floorboards. Dust swirled gently in the light, like it was dancing. I thought about Grandpa again. I was maybe 9 or 10 when he let me help repaint the old boathouse. It was the first time anyone had trusted me with a brush, and I remember asking if I was doing it right. He said, "If you're doing it with care, you're doing it right." This, he added, tapping the wet wood with a grin, is what real ownership feels like. He'd meant the brush, the paint, the process. But standing there now, in that living room, I finally understood. Ownership wasn't about paperwork. It was about intention. I pulled out my phone again and called Emily. "Graham," she answered. "Is this about that logo update or—" "I bought a place," I said. "Lake Arrowhead. I want to build something. A real retreat. Not just a trip." There was silence on her end, then a slow, rising enthusiasm. "Oh, you're serious. You're serious." "I am." "I'm in." I grinned. "You haven't even heard what I'm planning. You're calling me, which means it'll be beautiful, and chaotic, and heartfelt. I'm in." As we hung up, I felt the house shift around me again, not physically, but energetically, like it knew I meant to fill it with something real, not revenge, not theatrics, just people who needed room to breathe, people like me. My laptop buzzed on the counter. I walked over and saw the email from the listing site, confirming the transaction. At the bottom, bolded in small text, "Available the exact week of your stay." I smiled, but not for show, just for myself. This wasn't about rattling them, but it would. And that, honestly, was just a bonus. If they could fit 118 people into their world, surely I could find 22 who belonged in mine. The kitchen table was covered in sticky notes, names, ideas, phone numbers. Some were crossed out, others circled twice. A few had tiny coffee rings from my glass of wine, like they'd already been blessed with conversation. Lena sat across from me, legs curled under her like she was camping out. She had a notepad on her lap and a pencil in her mouth. Half the eraser was gone. She'd been chewing it for the past hour without realizing. "This is starting to feel like a wedding guest list," she said, glancing at the growing pile of discarded names. "It kind of is," I replied, "except no one's marrying anyone and the cake's optional." We both laughed, but underneath it, there was something sharper. I'd spent most of my adult life pretending family dynamics didn't bother me, that being left out was just something you got used to. But this year, something cracked. Not like a shatter, more like a door quietly unlocking from the inside. I wanted people who saw me, not out of obligation, not because we shared blood or history or photo albums, but because, at some point, we'd shared truth. I looked down at the sticky note nearest to me. Eleanor, bookstore owner. She once stayed open late so I could finish printing my senior portfolio. When I thanked her, she said, "People like you don't just make things. You give people permission to feel." Next to it, Troy, photographer, outdoor series. We met on a hiking trail during a solo retreat I took 2 years ago. He offered me granola and told me about losing his brother. By the time we reached the summit, we'd both cried. I pulled out a clean sheet and started writing from scratch. No order, no pressure, just people who'd shown up, quietly, consistently, and without fanfare. Lena glanced up. "You're doing it the old school way." "I want to see their names," I said. "All at once." She smiled. "Fair." I added Miranda, a ceramicist who once told me that the cracks in her work were the most honest parts. Then Joel, a therapist friend who sent me a postcard every New Year's saying, "You're still here, that's enough." And then I hesitated. I stared at a blank space near the bottom of the page, the only name that had hovered on the edge of my mind all night. Sarah, my youngest sibling, the one who'd once pulled me aside during Thanksgiving and whispered, "I wish they treated you the way they treat Jack." I'd shrugged it off. She'd cried. We never talked about it again. I picked up my phone and typed. Me. "Hey, I'm putting together something at the lake next month. Small, creative, quiet. I'd love for you to come." I stared at it. Deleted. "I'd love." Typed. "I'd really like." Deleted that too. Finally just sent it as it was. The response came quicker than expected. "Sarah, I'd rather be where I'm not a footnote. Count me in." I stared at her words for a while. There was something in them I hadn't realized I needed. Someone else saying it out loud. I wasn't a footnote. Not here. I stood up, stretched my arms overhead, and walked over to refill our glasses. Lena tapped the table. "That makes 19. You want to stop there?" "No," I said. "3 more, I know who." I added 2 former clients who had become friends over time, women who'd built their own businesses from the ground up and always made time to encourage mine. Then one last name. Ruth Keating, my former professor, the only authority figure in my life who ever told me I didn't have to prove my worth to be worthy. I opened my laptop, built a simple invite, warm tones, quiet fonts, a sketch of the lake, Mercer's Retreat for Creative Rest, August 10th to 14th. Lake Arrowhead, California private gathering. No keynotes, no panels, just people. I added a note at the bottom. This is a space for people who know how to make room for each other. Come as you are. And then I hit send. One by one, emails went out into the world like folded paper boats. A minute later, my phone buzzed. Emily. Emily. Heads up, one of your invitees is also on their list this year. I stared at the screen. It didn't say who, didn't need to. But I knew that if someone had to choose between their invitation and mine, maybe it wasn't a loss if they didn't pick me. Because this time, the table wasn't about proving anything. It was about building it right. Turns out, chosen family shows up a lot faster than the ones who share your name. This wasn't just a gathering, it was a reclamation. The sun was low over Lake Arrowhead, brushing the tops of the trees with soft gold. We sat on the wide wraparound porch of the house I now owned, notebooks and laptops spread across the picnic table, like we were preparing for something sacred instead of scribbling logistics. Emily had her sleeves rolled up and a half-drunk cold brew sweating beside her MacBook. Carlos, the chef Lena had recommended, was flipping through a stack of handwritten recipes, his fingers stained with something that smelled like rosemary and brown sugar. "This doesn't need to be gourmet," he said, tapping the page. "It needs to be comforting. Food that tastes like something their grandmother might have made, but with better seasoning." I nodded. "Nothing pretentious, just honest." "Cornbread," he said, grinning. "Made in cast iron. Fresh trout, roasted vegetables. Berry cobbler if the season's right." Emily raised an eyebrow. "We serving this on fine china or paper plates?" Carlos smiled. "Whichever holds up under second helpings." Lena was sketching table layouts on a napkin, but she looked up to add, "I want people to breathe when they walk in. You know, not feel like they're about to network." Emily chuckled. "You do know half the world doesn't know how to relax without an agenda anymore, right?" "That's why this matters," I said. They looked at me. I surprised even myself with the firmness in my voice. I reached over and turned the notebook toward me. I don't want panels. I don't want lectures. I want mornings where people can sketch on the dock. Afternoons with music and silence in equal measure. Evenings by the fire. Stories, not speeches. Carlos gave a small nod. That. I can cook for. I scrolled through the retreat website I'd been quietly building at night. It was simple. Warm tones, organic shapes, images of the lake and pine trees. The tagline, in small, deliberate font. Mercer's Retreat for Creative Rest. August 10th to 14th, Lake Arrowhead, California. No pitches, no PowerPoints, just space. There was a tiny logo I'd drawn myself in the corner, a hand-drawn pine tree with an open door in the trunk. Emily leaned over to read. Did you just design a treehouse for the emotionally exhausted? Exactly, I said. Ruth joined via speakerphone, her voice crackling softly from the center of the table. I love it, she said after we updated her. But don't forget why this is different. It's not about impressing. It's about including. Her voice dropped lower, like she'd leaned in closer to the mic. Anyone can host a retreat. Very few invite people into their healing. I looked around at my friends, this messy, brilliant, non-obligatory family. Carlos returned to his papers. Lena disappeared inside to prep the welcome baskets. Emily opened her laptop again and began mapping out days like puzzle pieces. And me? I clicked the final button that made the website live. For a second, the screen just spun. Then it settled. Published. I exhaled through my nose and leaned back in the chair, watching the light slide off the lake. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like reclamation. Like every time I'd been told I was too sensitive, or too different, or not enough. Those pieces of me had been collected and given somewhere to land. My phone buzzed in my pocket. New message. The subject line read, Retreat Inquiry. Guest List Question. I opened it. Just one sentence. Looks amazing. Surprised I wasn't invited. Jack. I stared at the screen for a moment. Jack. My brother. The one who'd followed Dad into finance. The one who never looked at me funny but never looked too hard either. The one who always stayed neutral, even when neutrality meant complicity. I didn't respond. Not yet. Instead, I closed the message and looked out at the water. I wasn't chasing their approval anymore. But I wasn't avoiding their curiosity either. Maybe that's what growth looks like. Not burning bridges, just building another one in a different direction. I didn't need them to know, but I knew they would. It was just a photo, a quiet one. No people in the frame. Just the lake, still and glassy, catching the last hints of lavender from the sky. The sun had already dipped behind the pines, and the reflection shimmered like a bruise healing. The caption was simple. Some spaces heal more than they hurt. I posted it without thinking. No hashtags, no tags. Just a moment I wanted to hold. The house was silent except for the gentle spin of a vintage jazz record Lena had found at a flea market. Bill Evans, soft and almost apologetic. It played from the speaker tucked into the corner of the dining room while I sat at the long farmhouse table, wrapping the last of the welcome baskets. Each one had the same bones. Locally made soap, a journal with the retreat logo embossed on the cover, herbal tea, a postcard of the lake. But I added something small and personal to each. An old Polaroid for one, a pressed flower for another, a tiny note card with a quote for a third. I liked the slowness of it, the intention. I picked up Sarah's basket last. Her journal was a warm ochre color, soft to the touch. I opened it, hesitated, then slid a folded note between the first 2 pages. You were never invisible. I didn't sign it. My phone buzzed. Jack. Saw the post. Dad's asking questions. That was all. No punctuation, no emojis, no, how are you? I stared at the message, let it sit there like a pebble in my palm. Another buzz. Donna. Hope you're having a restful summer, sweetheart. Sweetheart. I could count on one hand the number of times she'd called me that, and most of them were before I had facial hair. Lena walked in, barefoot, holding 2 mugs of chamomile tea. She set one down beside me and looked at the phone still lit in my hand. They see it? Jack did. Mom, too. She nodded. Want to talk about it? No, I said. I want to let it sit where it lands. She didn't push. We sat in silence for a while, sipping tea, listening to the record crackle into another track. I stared out the window, past the dark porch, into the tree line. I couldn't see their house from here, but I could feel the weight of it, like an echo behind drywall. When I was 8, I carved my name into the underside of a deck bench at that house. I thought it was clever, my own secret place, hidden just enough to belong, but close enough to feel real. My dad found it 2 days later, said nothing, just repainted the bench. I checked it the following summer. He'd used thick outdoor paint. You couldn't even feel the groove of the letters anymore. That's how erasure works. Not loudly, not with drama. Quiet. Smooth. Final. The tea warmed my throat, and the record ended with a soft shh. I stood, stretched, and turned down the lights. Only the lamp above the table stayed on now, casting long shadows over the baskets. 22 of them. Each one a piece of something I hadn't known I was building until it was almost finished. My phone buzzed again. Sarah. That photo you posted, it felt like a window I didn't know I needed. I smiled, typing back. Me. Can't wait to see you. She responded with a heart. I didn't hear Lena move, but she was standing at the window now, her silhouette quiet against the glass. She tilted her head, squinting. What? I asked. She didn't answer right away, just pulled the curtain back slightly, watching the driveway. Finally, she said softly, we might have uninvited visitors tomorrow. I walked over, stood beside her, but there was nothing out there, just darkness and the faint shimmer of lake light bouncing off car hoods. Still, I knew what she meant, because sometimes silence doesn't mean nothing is coming. Sometimes it means something is already here. They didn't ring the bell. They just appeared, like the morning mist off the lake, soft, quiet, and full of presence. I'd been up since before the light broke. Couldn't sleep. The kind of restlessness that doesn't come from nerves exactly, but from anticipation laced with something more personal. Not performance, not pressure, just readiness. The coffee pot sputtered to life while I adjusted the last of the name cards on the entry table. Each card tucked into a little wooden holder, a slice of branch I'd sanded myself, something to ground the names in something real. Carlos was already in the kitchen when I walked in, sleeves rolled, apron dusted with flour. The smell of cinnamon and baked apples floated through the hall. They'll remember this smell, he said without looking up. Memory starts in the nose. Out on the porch, Lena had lit a few citronella candles and arranged the welcome baskets into a neat arc by the door. She moved easily through the morning air, barefoot, humming something I didn't recognize. It felt like watching someone set a stage without any script. By 8:30, the gravel on the driveway began to crunch. First came Troy, the photographer, carrying more camera equipment than luggage. Then Miranda, with her rolling suitcase and a tote bag full of sketchbooks. Then a couple whose names I only knew from email, smiling, cautious but open. The door stayed open. Guests trickled in like weather. Not loud, not fast. Just arriving. Carlos handed out mugs of hot cider, steam curling above each cup like punctuation. A plate of warm cinnamon bread disappeared within minutes. Someone put on a jazz playlist, and the music wove itself through the rooms, like it had always lived there. There was laughter, but the kind that didn't ask for attention. The kind that sits comfortably between strangers because no one's pretending. Around 10, Sarah arrived. She stepped out of her car in jeans and a flannel, hair tied up in a loose knot. When she saw me, she didn't wave, just walked straight over and pulled me into a hug that didn't rush to end. "This," she said quietly, "is the first place in a long time that feels like it wants me in it." She handed me a small envelope. Inside was a faded photo. Me, maybe 9 years old, crouched by the edge of the lake, sketchbook in lap, tongue poking out in concentration. Grandpa stood a few feet behind me, arms crossed, watching me like the lake was mine to draw. "Where'd you find this?" I asked. "In a box Mom meant to toss." I didn't respond, just ran my thumb over the grainy surface of the photo and let the moment stretch. As the morning deepened, conversations sparked like matches across the house. 2 guests bonded over mutual friends in the art world. Someone had brought a harmonica. A gentle rhythm of belonging began to hum underneath everything. And then I saw them. Across the fence, just past the bend where the trail curves and the trees thin, standing like shadows just outside the frame. My parents. Martin and Donna. He stood with his hands behind his back, military straight. She held a paper cup, steam rising, sunglasses too large for her face. They didn't wave, and neither did I. But I didn't look away either. I let them see me. Not the angry son, not the disappointment, not the one who never followed instructions. Just me. And around me, a porch full of people who'd shown up. Not because they had to, but because they chose to. They built a fence. I built a view. They stood at the gate, not to be let in, just to be noticed. I saw them from the porch. Lena was beside me, sorting through tomorrow's meal checklist, but her eyes shifted the moment mine did. There was no mistaking the posture. Dad with his arms crossed, shoulders stiff like he was back in the service. Mom slightly behind him, holding her purse like it might fly away if she loosened her grip. They didn't speak, just stood there, framed by the wooden archway that marked the entrance to my property. I hadn't added a gate, not a real one, just 2 low stone pillars that used to be part of a broken fence. They weren't there to be closed, just to mark the boundary. I stepped down the porch steps, slow and steady. My boots crunched softly on the gravel. The air smelled like pine and sun-warmed wood, but there was something cool in the wind now. That kind of breeze that comes right before a shift in weather. Mom offered a smile when I approached. Tight. Performed. "Hi, honey." Dad didn't say anything. His eyes scanned the porch behind me, the windows, the laughter drifting faintly from inside. I stopped just short of the stones. "If you're here to talk," I said, voice level, "we can talk." Neither moved. "But if you're here to observe, to see what all this looks like, then you're welcome to come in. As guests. That's how this works." I let the silence land, let it stretch into the space between us. For once, I didn't fill it. Mom looked at Dad. He didn't look back. We heard from Jack that you were doing something here," she said. "And we thought it might be a good idea to stop by. See what it's all about." I tilted my head. "You didn't think to call?" She hesitated. "We weren't sure you'd answer." "You were right." Dad shifted his weight, jaw twitching. He opened his mouth, then closed it. I didn't step back, didn't invite them in. Mom tried again. "It's just all these people. On the same week as the retreat, it felt coincidental." I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. "It wasn't." "Graham," she said gently, "we didn't mean to exclude you. There were just a lot of moving parts. And we thought that I'd be busy," I interrupted, "that I'd be fine, that I wouldn't notice. Same thing you thought when you skipped my first gallery show. When you sent a generic card for my 35th. She looked down. Dad finally spoke. This doesn't have to be a confrontation. I nodded. Then let's not make it one. But you should know something. I took a breath. This isn't about space. It's about priority. And I never made your list. There it was. No yelling. No accusations. Just the truth. Spoken plainly in the air between us. It landed hard. Mom blinked. Slowly. Her voice softened. Wavered. Did we really make you feel like that? I didn't answer right away. Because it wasn't about feeling. It was about reality. It takes years to build silence thick enough to feel like truth, and even longer to name it. So I looked at her, at both of them, and said calmly, yes. Then I turned and walked back up the path. I didn't look over my shoulder, but I knew they stayed there, standing at the edge of a space they'd never imagined I'd claim for myself. The silver Cadillac pulled up like it belonged to the land. No engine growl, no gravel flying. Just a slow roll down the drive, like the car knew the curves better than I did. The sun was bleeding into the trees by then, leaving streaks of orange and plum across the lake. Most of us were gathered near the fire pit out back, blankets on shoulders, wine in hand, conversation humming like a late summer insect song. Someone asked, "You expecting anyone else?" I wasn't. But when the door opened and I saw her step out, black slacks, crisp white blouse, silver hair swept back into a soft twist, I smiled like I'd known she was coming all along. "Maggie," I said, standing. "Don't make a scene," she called back, shutting the door with that deliberate grace only women over 70 seem to master. She walked slowly, taking everything in. The laughter, the music drifting from the porch speaker, the faint clink of plates being washed inside. Her eyes moved from face to face before settling on mine. "This," she said, waving one hand in a small circle, "feels more like your grandparents than anything your father ever touched." I pulled out a chair. She lowered herself into it without a word and reached for a glass of red someone had already poured, as if the universe had been expecting her too. Sarah came over and hugged her. Lena offered her a plate. Maggie accepted both like she belonged, because she did. We sat like that for a while. No speeches, no grand entrances, just presence. Later, when most had drifted inside, Maggie and I stayed by the fire. The logs had settled into glowing embers, casting just enough light to see the lines around her eyes. "I kept something," she said, reaching into her purse. She handed me a folded envelope, yellowed with time. My name was written on the front in Grandpa's handwriting, the same block letters I used to watch him carve into driftwood signs. I didn't speak, just unfolded the paper, hands trembling more than I expected. "Graham, you see the world differently. That's not a defect. That's an inheritance. You don't belong to the systems your father builds. You belong to the spirit your grandmother and I tried to preserve. If anyone ever tries to make you choose between fitting in and standing true, stand true. You were never meant to run things. You were meant to carry them forward. The soul of this place was always meant for you. Love, Grandpa Robert." I couldn't say anything. I folded the letter slowly, gently, like it might vanish if I handled it wrong. "I tried to give it to you years ago," Maggie said. "Your mother intercepted the package, said you didn't need more distractions." I nodded once. My throat was tight. "She never told me. She didn't think you'd stay the course," Maggie said. "But I did, and so did he." We sat in silence, letting the fire do the talking. Finally, she added, "I'm still trustee of the North Lot. Your grandfather wanted that land kept separate, outside the main retreat. I've kept it quiet. But I think it's time." I turned to her. "I want you to use it," she said. "Every summer, for 1 week. However you want. No permissions, no forms. Just show up." I swallowed. "Are you sure?" She reached over and tapped the letter. He was. I didn't cry. Not then. But something in me broke open, like an old door finally swinging free from a rusted hinge. Across the lake, a light flickered on in the guest house of the main family retreat. I saw movement. Jack, stepping out onto the upper balcony, arms folded, staring in our direction. I didn't wave, but I didn't look away either. Jack didn't knock. He just walked over like it was still his world, too. I spotted him from the path that cut behind the dock, where pine needles clung to damp shoes, and the lake's mist hovered low, like it hadn't decided whether to stay or rise. He moved like someone who wasn't sure if he was welcome, but had already committed to the walk. It was early, earlier than most retreat guests stirred. I liked that part of the day best. The quiet before words started taking up space. The trees whispered instead of talked. The water didn't ask questions. Jack didn't speak until we were walking side by side. "This trail still smells the same," he said. "Wet wood. Old campfires." I nodded. "Hasn't changed much." He gave a small laugh. "Except, now one of us owns a house at the end of it." I didn't respond. Let the trees answer for me. We passed the bend near the flat rock where we used to build sandcastles as kids. I remembered piling up the towers, shaping dragons with bottle caps and sticks, while Jack made straight walls and perfect turrets. Dad had taken one look and said, "Now that's structure," pointing to Jack's creation. I'd knocked mine over before we left, not out of spite, just so no one else had to see what wasn't good enough. "You've been watching, haven't you?" I asked. Jack glanced sideways. "Yeah, online mostly. Sarah sends me things too." "And?" "It's good. It feels real. Like something Grandpa would have done if he'd had the budget and a better Wi-Fi connection." I chuckled, despite myself. He kicked a pine cone along the path, hands in his pockets. "I used to think being the one who stayed close meant I was doing the right thing," he said. "But you were the one making something of your own, even when it looked messy." "Freedom felt a lot like exile," I said. "Back then," he nodded slowly. "I know." We stopped by the edge of the lake. The mist was starting to lift, but it still curled around the shoreline like memory. "I didn't know how to defend you," Jack said. "And honestly, I was scared if I did, I'd lose what I had. Their approval, the access, the easy path. I never expected you to defend me," I said. "I just didn't want you to pretend it wasn't happening." He looked down. "I wasn't brave," he said finally. "Not like you." I shook my head. "You weren't free to be. That's different." We stood there a while longer, watching the light shift. Then he said, almost too casually, "If you run this again next year, I'd like to help. However I can." It wasn't a performance. There was no audience. Just two men standing in the same place, finally speaking the same language. I looked at him. "It's not about help, Jack," I said. "It's about showing up when it's inconvenient." He didn't flinch. "I can do that," he said. We didn't hug. That wasn't us. But we walked back up the path together, not as brothers trying to be what we weren't, but as men trying, for once, to understand what that meant. I set one extra plate at the table. I didn't say for who. It was just there, like a breath held open, like a seat kept warm for something not yet named. Maybe it was for forgiveness. Maybe it was for memory. Maybe it was just for me, finally stepping into a space I'd built with intention instead of resentment. The last night of the retreat always carried a strange rhythm. Not quite an ending. Not yet a goodbye. A slow exhale. Everyone had softened. The conversations weren't just introductions anymore. They were reflections, callbacks to moments we didn't know we'd needed until we had them. The table stretched nearly the length of the wraparound porch, long planks of oak weathered by time, lit by hanging string lights that swayed gently in the evening air. Someone had tucked wildflowers into glass jars. A few guests had brought wine. Carlos outdid himself. Roasted chicken with lemon, charred vegetables, cornbread, with just enough bite to make you slow down between stories. Dishes passed hand to hand. Elbows bumped. Laughter rose in waves. Sarah sat to my left, cheeks pink from wine and sunlight. Lena was across from me, quietly smiling like someone watching a dream unfold in real time. Maggie held court at the far end, retelling a story about my grandfather and a fishing trip gone sideways. Something about a duck stealing his sandwich. Then, halfway through the meal, they came. Donna and Martin. They didn't announce themselves. Just stepped onto the porch like the tension wasn't a guest of its own. Donna wore a soft blue sweater and carried a bottle of wine, unsure of her hands. Martin followed behind, empty-handed, eyes scanning the table like it was an exam he hadn't studied for. No one said anything. No one had to. I gestured toward the open chair, the extra plate. She sat first. He hesitated, then followed. Carlos raised an eyebrow at me from the kitchen window, and I gave him a small nod. He added 2 more portions to his platter and brought it over without a word. We passed food. Donna thanked him quietly, complimented the spice on the chicken. "This is lovely," she said, then turned to me. "Did you design the table settings?" I nodded. She nodded back, like she wasn't quite sure what came next. Martin didn't speak, but he watched. He watched Sarah laugh with a poet from Oregon. He watched Lena clink glasses with Maggie. He watched the guests pass plates like they'd known each other longer than they had. He watched me, the way a man looks when he's realizing something too late. As the night deepened and conversation circled back to where things began, I felt a shift, not loud, not dramatic, just a subtle pause in the hum of voices. Martin stood. He held his wine glass awkwardly, cleared his throat. "I've given speeches," he said, "in boardrooms and banquet halls, retirement parties, merger announcements. None of them quite felt like this." A few heads turned. Forks paused midair. He looked at me. "You built something here, Graham. Something they'll remember longer than the bank will remember me." That was all. He sat back down. Quiet. Still watching. I didn't answer. Just reached for my glass and nodded once. The wind picked up then, soft and cool, like it was leaning in to listen. As the plates cleared and the porch filled with the sounds of a retreat winding down, Jack appeared at my side. He held something small in his hand, a folded letter, yellowed at the edges. "You should have had this years ago," he said. And just like that, the night turned again. His handwriting hadn't changed, bold, squared, like he was always certain. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee going lukewarm, sunlight pouring in through the window just above the sink. The house was quiet again. Most of the guests had gone by now, and the porch felt oddly large without voices echoing across it. The letter lay in front of me, folded once. Thick paper, the kind you don't find much anymore. My name was written on the front. Graham, in that familiar all-caps style Grandpa used for everything from grocery lists to birthday cards. I hesitated. 12 years ago, I'd found a different letter tucked inside an old sketchbook he'd once given me. I'd opened it with hope, but the page had been blank. I told myself he'd just forgotten to write in it. But I also wondered if maybe he didn't know what to say. This time, the page wasn't blank. "Graham, there's a good chance this doesn't reach you when I meant it to. That's how life works sometimes. What's clear in the heart doesn't always travel fast enough in the mail. I wanted this to find you on your 21st birthday. That felt like a moment, a hinge between boy and man. But now, maybe you're older, maybe wiser. Maybe tired in a way I wish you weren't. I've watched how you see the world, not just with your eyes, but with your questions, with your doubt, with your defiance. You don't walk through life like it's a hallway you were told to follow. You stop. You look out windows. You build doors. That's not a defect, Graham. That's your inheritance. You don't belong to the systems your father builds. You belong to the spirit your grandmother and I tried to preserve. The slow mornings, the quiet talks, the laughter that didn't need a punchline, the kind of family you choose over the one you perform for. You'll carry the soul of this place farther than I ever could. You were never meant to manage it. You were meant to love it. That's your job now, and I trust you with it. Love, Grandpa Robert. I didn't cry right away. I read it 3 times, each slower than the last. My hand moved to the center of my chest almost instinctively, like trying to press the words into bone. The 3rd time through, I let the tears come. Not the loud kind, not the shaking kind, just quiet, hot, cleansing. I wept for the boy who had once felt invisible at his own birthday table, for the teenager who'd gotten a blank page and convinced himself he didn't deserve more. And I wept, too, for the man I'd become, because I no longer needed this letter to feel worthy. But God, it still meant everything to hold it. Lena entered softly, barefoot, holding 2 mugs of fresh coffee. She paused when she saw me, eyes rimmed, letter open, hand still on my heart. She didn't say anything, just set the coffee down and slid a manila envelope across the table. "This came with the mail this morning," she said gently. "From Maggie." I looked at it. No stamps, just a handwritten label in that precise cursive Maggie still used, like time hadn't dared touch her handwriting. Inside was a short note and a single sheet. The deed transfer, North Lot. 1 week each summer. Full usage rights. She had filed it. The paper was dry, official. But in that moment, it felt like something sacred. I looked back at Grandpa's letter, then out the window, where the lake shimmered beyond the trees. Sometimes, the approval we needed most wasn't the kind we had to earn, just the kind they forgot to give. The road curved along the lake like it was guiding me home. But this time, I wasn't leaving anything behind. I'd packed the car slowly that morning, not out of reluctance, just care. Leftover cider in a mason jar, a box of extra cornbread wrapped in foil, folded thank you notes tucked between pages of my sketchbook. A few guests had slipped notes into their baskets, and I didn't find them until I started clearing out. Each one felt like a small stone placed in the foundation of something I didn't know I was building. The air was cooler than expected. Crisp. The kind of cold that reminds you fall isn't far off, even when the sun pretends otherwise. I pulled out of the driveway with the windows cracked. Music. Off. Just the wind, the engine, and the last whispers of pine sap and wood smoke from the house. Half an hour into the drive, my phone buzzed on the passenger seat. I let it wait until I reached a pull-off, one of those roadside overlooks where the lake spills out below like a quiet secret. I stopped, stepped out, stretched, breathed. Carlos had texted. "Still thinking about the fire pit talk. Can we do this again next year?" Then Sarah. I didn't know how much I needed that. I'd sign up in a heartbeat. I smiled, the kind that doesn't make your cheeks ache, just a soft pull at the corners. Gratitude without weight. Then a voicemail. "Martin." I paused before pressing play. His voice came through the speaker, low, hesitant. "Graham, I don't know what to say, but thank you. For letting us come, for making space. It changed something. I don't know what yet, but it did." There was a pause before the line clicked off. No apology, no excuses. But I didn't need them. I slid the phone back into my pocket and turned toward the lake. It shimmered under the morning light, a few ripples chasing each other toward the far side. For the first time, I realized I wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. Not to them. Not to the version of me that used to sit outside their doors, waiting to be let in. I pulled out my phone and opened the camera. Took a photo. No captions. No need to share it. Just for me. Then I did something small. I scrolled through my folders. Found the one titled Family Retreat 2015 to 2021. Inside were photos, some sent by cousins, others screenshotted from Facebook or group texts I'd been accidentally left off of. Images I used to study like maps, hoping to trace my own outline somewhere in the margins. I tapped Select All, paused, then hit Delete. Not in anger, not in bitterness, just in peace. Closure doesn't come in grand gestures. It comes when you no longer rehearse your pain. The road stretched ahead. The city waited. My life, unchanged and entirely different, waited. When I finally reached my apartment in Pasadena, the building looked the same. Same sidewalk crack near the mailbox. Same neighbors' potted plants drooping in the heat. Same quiet hum from the old refrigerator as I stepped inside. But on the kitchen counter, slipped beneath my door by the mail slot, was an envelope. Handwritten. No return address. But I knew the handwriting. Donna. It wasn't long. Just enough to make me believe she'd tried. The letter from my mother was written in blue ink, the kind that smudges if your hand shakes. Her cursive had softened with age. Still neat, but no longer sharp. The envelope hadn't been sealed all the way. A small corner lifted like it had second thoughts. I sat at the kitchen table with one lamp on, the apartment dim except for the yellow cone of light that made the paper glow like something more than it was. I read it slowly. Graham, I'm not sure if I'm saying this the right way or at the right time, but I want you to know I'm trying. I didn't know how to raise a son I didn't understand. You felt different, not worse, just far away, and I think I spent more time trying to fix the distance than trying to cross it. I know that hurt you. Maybe still does. I'm still learning. Love, Mom. There were no demands in the letter, no guilt, just space. It felt strange. For most of my life, I'd built armor around the idea that nothing from her would feel sincere, that any softness was strategy. But this felt like something cracked open, not fully, but enough to see through. I folded the letter once, then again, slid it back into the envelope but didn't tuck it away. Instead, I dialed Ruth. She answered on the second ring. You sound like someone who just swallowed something heavy, she said. I got a letter, I said, from my mother. She didn't rush me, just waited. She said she's still learning, I added. Didn't ask for anything, didn't defend herself. Ruth said. And what are you learning? I exhaled. That I don't have to respond right away, that I can feel grateful without giving up ground. She chuckled softly. Growth doesn't mean returning, Graham. It means choosing. Freely. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. After we hung up, I sat still for a while, letting the apartment hum around me. The sound of the fridge, the faint creak of the ceiling, a neighbor's dog barking once, then falling silent. My phone buzzed. Sarah. FYI, Mom and Dad said they want to invite you next year. No pressure. Just wanted you to know. I stared at the screen. Not long ago, that sentence would have been a lifeline, a validation I would have clung to like oxygen. Now, it was just information. And that shift? That was everything. I walked to the window, pulled the curtain back, looked out at the city lights. They blinked steady and indifferent, like they always had. I whispered, more to myself than anyone. I'll go. Maybe. But not because I need to, because I want to, if I ever do. Then I turned back to the desk, opened my laptop, created a new folder. Mercer Retreat 2025. Ideas I didn't fill it yet, just left it open. Sometimes planning is a form of hope. Sometimes the smallest next step is the most honest one. Forgiveness isn't a gift you give them. It's the anchor you release so you can sail. 1 year later, the lake looked the same. But I didn't. The water still curled against the shore like it had secrets to keep. The pines still stood like sentinels. The dock creaked in the same old rhythm. But when I stepped onto the land this time, I didn't feel like I was trespassing on someone else's legacy. I was home. The second Mercer Retreat wasn't bigger. I didn't want it to be. It was better. Fuller, maybe. Not with people, but with intention. The northern lot, what Grandpa had kept separate, what Maggie had quietly passed to me, held the same soul as his old cabin, but it wore a new face now. Tables under canvas tents, easels and camp chairs, a circle of mismatched cushions for evening talks, everything rough-edged and purposeful. No polish, no pretense. I walked the grounds before breakfast, letting the dew soak into the cuffs of my jeans. A few early risers were already journaling by the water. One woman was sketching wildflowers. Jack was at the far end, stringing lights between trees, humming some tune I didn't recognize. Sarah stood near the main gathering spot, notebook in hand, guiding a small group through a morning reflection exercise. She caught my eye and smiled, genuine, steady. The kind of smile that says, "I see you," without needing to say anything else. A boy, maybe 13, maybe a little younger, sat cross-legged near the dock, pencil scratching across a page. I paused a few steps behind him, watching his hand move. He turned, sensing me. "You draw?" he asked. "Sometimes," I said. He held up his sketchbook. It was the lake. Our lake. But without the fences. The cabin was there, the dock, even the crooked pine near the bend in the trail, but no boundary lines, just open space. "I didn't like the fence," he said, pointing at the blank area. It felt wrong. I nodded slowly. "You're not the only one who thought that." He smiled, shrugged, and turned back to his work. I stood there for a long moment, letting it sink in. This was what healing looked like. Not ceremony, not forgiveness scripted for an audience, just a kid drawing a better version of what he saw. By mid-morning, the house was alive. Lena organized the food table. Jack handed out sketch pads. Sarah led a conversation about belonging without permission. People laughed. Someone played a guitar off to the side, badly but joyfully. And me? I walked through it all, quietly. I didn't need to host with a microphone. I didn't need to prove anything anymore. This was mine, not in ownership but in spirit, and that made all the difference. I thought about Grandpa's words, long ago, words I didn't understand until now. "One day, you'll build something bigger than this cabin." He didn't mean size. He meant meaning. We can't always change the people we come from, but we can change the spaces we create and who we welcome in. As the sun dipped behind the trees and the lake shimmered gold once more, I stepped back, looked around at what we'd made. They once told me there wasn't enough space, so I made my own and left the door open. You know, for a long time I thought healing meant going back. Back to the table, back to the room where it all went wrong, waiting for someone to pull out a chair and say, "We saved this spot for you." But what I've learned, and maybe what life's been trying to teach me all along, is that sometimes healing doesn't look like going back. Sometimes healing looks like building a whole new table. And here's the thing. The people who belong, they'll come. Not because you begged them to, but because they recognize the space you made. I don't share this story because I think my family is worse than most. I share it because I know I'm not alone. And maybe you're watching this now, thinking of your own gate or your own empty seat. Let me ask you, what would it look like if you stopped waiting and started building? Because forgiveness isn't about forgetting the past, it's about freeing the future. And sometimes, the most powerful justice isn't loud, it's quiet, intentional, and built with love. We can't always change the people we come from, but we can change the spaces we create and who we welcome in. If this story made you pause, made you feel seen, leave a comment with the number 1 to let me know you're here. Tell me, where are you watching from today? Have you ever had to choose between peace and people? And hey, if you have a different perspective, I'd love to read it in the comments. If you enjoy stories like this, real ones, with heart and healing, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss what's coming next. Until then, take care of your space and take care of yourself.